Prime Minister Mark Carney is in Beijing at this hour as his team prepares for trade talks with the Chinese government.
Nearly a decade has passed since a Canadian Prime Minister last arrived in Beijing. In political terms, that gap might as well have been a generation. The global balance has shifted, alliances have been tested, and economic pressures have reshaped priorities on every continent. When Mark Carney's aircraft touched down in the Chinese capital, it was not just a diplomatic visit. It was a signal that something fundamental in Canada's foreign policy was being recalibrated. Within minutes of arrival, the tone was clear. A formal nighttime reception awaited on the tarmac, complete with a military honor guard, senior officials, and carefully arranged protocol. This was not a low-profile stopover. It was the first official visit by a Canadian Prime Minister in 8 years, and the first time since 2017 the Chinese state media treated a Canadian leader with full ceremonial visibility. Before we go deeper into what this visit really means, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analysis on the geopolitical shifts shaping Canada's future and the global balance of power. Carney arrived late on January 14, 2026, and moved immediately into a tightly scheduled agenda. By the following morning, cameras followed his motorcade through Beijing toward the Great Hall of the People, a venue reserved for moments Beijing wants the world to notice. Chinese state television broadcast the scenes repeatedly, reinforcing a message aimed not just at Canadians, but at Washington, Brussels, and global markets. Canada was back at the table. Inside the Great Hall, Carney was greeted personally by Premier Li Qiang, the second most powerful figure in China's political hierarchy. The meeting was carefully choreographed, with opening remarks visible to the press. Li framed the visit as a turning point after years of frozen communication, emphasizing the need to remove obstacles, restore trust, and reopen channels that had remained dormant for nearly a decade. The language was deliberate, pointing toward stability, continuity, and long-term engagement, rather than a one-off reset. Economic cooperation took center stage immediately. Clean energy, advanced manufacturing, agriculture, aerospace, and digital technology were identified as priority areas. China signaled its readiness to deepen cooperation and expand Canada's access to its vast domestic market. The emphasis was not symbolic. It reflected Beijing's assessment that Canada now occupies a different strategic position than it did just a few years ago. Carney's response mirrored that tone. He acknowledged recent progress behind the scenes and spoke openly about rebuilding a comprehensive relationship. He outlined a vision that extended beyond trade into energy security, agriculture, people-to-people exchanges, multilateral coordination, and even security dialogue. The phrase strategic partnership surfaced repeatedly, indicating a shift away from transactional diplomacy towards something more durable. That shift became tangible during the signing ceremony that followed. Ministers from both governments finalized a series of agreements as cameras rolled. The centerpiece was a renewed memorandum on energy cooperation, updating a framework that had not been meaningfully touched since 2017. The agreement explicitly identified Canada as a reliable and responsible supplier of oil, liquefied natural gas, and liquefied petroleum gas to global markets, including China. The wording mattered. Canada was described as an important potential partner in ensuring stable energy supply during a period of global uncertainty. The document established new ministerial dialogue channels, reopened cooperation on emissions reduction and low-carbon transitions, and acknowledged that conventional energy will continue to play a critical role for years to come. In practical terms, China was signaling it needs Canadian energy now, not just in a distant green future. Additional agreements followed. A framework on wood construction promoted Canadian lumber and modern building technologies. Food safety and plant and animal health arrangements addressed lingering trade disruptions, including bans that had affected Canadian exporters for years. Cultural and tourism initiatives aimed to restore people-to-people exchanges that had collapsed during the diplomatic freeze. Provincial interests were also visible. Saskatchewan's premier attended the signing ceremony, reflecting pressure from farmers still affected by Chinese tariffs on canola. His presence underscored how deeply the diplomatic rupture had hurt regional economies and how much was riding on a successful reset. Beyond government meetings, Carney also sat down with executives from major Chinese firms spanning technology, finance, energy, and manufacturing. The message from Ottawa was clear. Canada is not only seeking to sell goods, but also welcoming investment. A joint economic roadmap released during the visit stated openly that Canada is prepared to accept Chinese investment in sectors ranging from energy and agriculture to consumer products. This marked a notable shift from years of caution and hesitation. Chinese officials reinforced the significance of the moment. Foreign Minister Wang Yi described the visit as a turning point, language echoed by senior party leaders and state media alike. Meetings with top legislative figures signaled that this reset had backing across China's political system, not just within one ministry. Chinese commentary left little ambiguity about expectations going forward. State-linked outlets argued that Canada's previous alignment with Washington had come at a cost and suggested Ottawa was now rediscovering the value of strategic independence. The implication was clear. Continued engagement would depend on Canada charting its own course rather than simply mirroring U.S. policy. Energy quickly became the backbone of Beijing's outreach. China's economy remains heavily dependent on imported oil and natural gas, and recent supply disruptions around the world have pushed energy security to the top of its strategic priorities. Volatility in the Middle East, sanctions on major producers, and the politicization of energy flows have all reinforced Beijing's desire for suppliers it views as stable, predictable, and insulated from sudden geopolitical shocks. In that context, Canada stands out. Its vast reserves, relatively stable political system, and reputation for regulatory reliability make it an attractive long-term partner. Canada's position has also changed in ways that were not possible a decade ago. Expanded pipeline capacity to the Pacific Coast and the gradual emergence of Canadian LNG exports to Asia have altered the country's energy map. For years, Canadian oil and gas flowed almost entirely south into the United States, leaving Ottawa with limited leverage and few alternatives. That constraint is now easing. Access to Asian markets gives Canada options, and options translate into bargaining power. Chinese officials made little effort to hide their awareness of this shift during the Beijing meetings. This new flexibility helps explain why energy discussions carried such weight. The conversations were not limited to volumes and pricing, but extended to long-term reliability, emissions management, and the role of conventional fuels during the global energy transition. China signaled that, despite massive investment in renewables, it still requires dependable supplies of oil and gas to sustain growth and manage volatility. Canada's ability to offer both scale and stability placed it in a favorable position. The contrast with Washington's approach was unmistakable. In recent years, U.S. policy toward China has been defined by tariffs, export controls, and an increasingly adversarial tone. Strategic competition has become the organizing principle, with economic ties often treated as vulnerabilities rather than assets. Canada, under Carney, appears to be testing a different path. By emphasizing engagement, diversification, and mutual economic benefit, Ottawa is attempting to reduce its exposure to any single partner. while avoiding outright confrontation. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the decisions reshaping Canada's place in the world.